afternoon. My name is Maureen Freschet, and I'm a member of the San Mateo City Council. I am delighted to welcome you here today for San Mateo's Before Our Very Eyes Human Trafficking Awareness event. You know, human trafficking is not a feel-good subject, but it is one we need to understand and recognize. So thank you for taking time to be here, especially on your day off. Today is a call to action, and when you leave here, you will have a better understanding of what human trafficking is, how it is impacting our community right here in San Mateo and throughout our county, and what you can do to protect your family and community. Now, today's event has been almost a year in the making. Last August, Pamela Estes and Georgie LeBerge, whom I'll introduce in a moment, came to me and reached out to see if I'd be interested in working on a human trafficking event in San Mateo. Supervisor Groom had referred them to me because she knew I had an interest in promoting awareness on this subject. So today's event and all the activities at the fair related to it are the result of our collaboration. We set about putting together a diverse committee of people with expertise in a variety of areas. And now I'd like to recognize the members of our planning committee and ask that they stand when I call their name. Chief Susan Manheimer, San Mateo Police Department. Mike Brosnan, Program Director, San Mateo County Human Trafficking Program. Belinda Carr, Before Our Very Eyes Coordinator. Alexi Chuko. If we can hold our applause till the end, that'd be great. Thank you. Alexi Chuko, Director of Operations. Isia Schreiner. Pamela Estes, Before Our Very Eyes Coordinator. Amanda Freeman, Program Director, Rape Trauma Services. Honorable Georgie LeBerge, former mayor of Redwood City and a Before Our Very Eyes coordinator. Terry Lee, associate head of school for the Nueva School. Dana Storr, the CEO of the San Mateo County Events Center. Brian Wu, co-founder of the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition. So I want to thank all of our committee members for their dedication and hard work in helping to make today possible. It was really an honor to work with all of them. Every member of our committee contributed significantly to this event, but I want to give a special shout out to Pamela Estes, who worked tirelessly and above and beyond the call of duty and was truly the glue who held our committee together. So Pamela, would you just join me here for a moment? And please accept this bouquet as an expression of heartfelt gratitude for your leadership. And please join me in giving a very well-deserved round of applause to our entire planning committee. So now I want to take an opportunity to thank our sponsors because this event would not have been possible without the generous support of the following organizations and individuals. And if representatives from the sponsor organizations are here, please stand up when I identify your organization or call you by name. Our presenting sponsors, the City of San Mateo, the San Mateo Police Department, the San Mateo County Event Center, San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, and the Nueva School. Our platinum sponsor, the County of San Mateo. Our gold sponsors, Bohannon Foundation, College Heights Church of San Mateo. Oh, great, thank you. Sequoia Healthcare District. Silver sponsors, Cachette, Petrie, and McCarthy, the Daily Journal, City of San Mateo, the Congressional Church of San Mateo, Kaiser Permanente, Linkso Garden Materials, Recology, the San Mateo County Association of Realtors, Elaine Gilbrick, and Alan Talansky. I think I saw Alan here. Our bronze sponsors, Andy Cresci and Maureen Freschet, and PG&E. Thank you to our sponsors for caring about the safety of our community. So please join me in a round of applause for all our sponsors. Want to take a moment to acknowledge our local elected officials who have taken time to join us here today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please stand when I say your name, and if I miss anyone, I apologize, and please let me know. From the City of San Mateo, Deputy Mayor Rick Bonilla, Councilman Joe Goethals, Councilwoman Diane Pappen. From the City of East Palo Alto, Councilwoman Lisa Gaucher and Councilwoman Donna Rutherford. And from the town of Hillsborough, Mayor Marie Chong. So thank you for being here. And did I miss anyone? Oh, Jeff G. from the city of Redwood City. Thank you. Okay, so before I introduce our first speaker, just a few housekeeping tips. Right outside the doors are the restrooms. There's also water available between the restrooms in the hallway. And in the interest of time today, we're not going to have a formal break, so please feel free to use the facilities as needed. Our program today will begin with 4 speakers, local dignitaries who will discuss how they and their particular arm of government are addressing this issue. This will be followed by a short film and then our panel of experts who will cover a host of issues related to victims, survivors, and how our county is mobilizing to battle human trafficking from a number of different perspectives. You will have an opportunity to ask questions of our speakers and panels, but only at the end of the panel discussion. Okay, now moving on to the beginning of our program, it's now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Congresswoman Jackie Speier. Jackie represents California's 14th Congressional District, which stretches from the southern portion of San Francisco through San Mateo County to Redwood City. She is a tireless advocate for women's rights, the public good, and the security of Americans. She serves on the House Armed Services Committee and on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. She was named to Newsweek's list of 150 fearless women in the world. Jackie's devotion to global human rights is legendary, and we're all humbled, remembering that Jackie nearly sacrificed her own life in a valiant effort to secure the freedom of Bay Area citizens being held against their will in the jungles of South America. Her devotion to protecting our citizens has never wavered. Thank you so much, Jackie, for joining us today.
Thank you, Maureen, for your outstanding leadership on this issue, for bringing all of us together to talk about it and to learn to recognize it. You know, before our own very eyes is an apt description of what's going on here. And I want to also thank Chief Manheimer for her invitation as well, and for the work that she's done, and all the other advocates who have come together today. So human trafficking is very simply modern-day slavery. An estimated 30 million people around the world are held in bondage for sex and labor. Now, I'm sure many of you here today think of it as a problem overseas. And we're here today not because it's a problem overseas, but because it's a problem in our very neighborhoods. 6 years ago, I didn't know much about this issue. And it wasn't until I read a shocking ad in the San Francisco Chronicle that I learned that between 100,000 and 300,000 children, and I underscore the word children, are trafficked here in the United States every single year. That ad made my stomach turn. It was an open letter to Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist. And Craig Newmark lives right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it was an open letter by 2 sex-trafficked survivors who pleaded with him to close down the adult services section on Craigslist. They called themselves AK and MC. AK wrote, and I quote, "I was sold for sex by the hour at truck stops and cheap motels. 10 hours with 10 different men every night." MC, who was forced into prostitution at the age of 11, wrote that her pimp, quote, "made $1,500 a night selling my body, dragging me to Los Angeles, Houston, Little Rock, and one trip to Las Vegas in the trunk of a car." I couldn't believe it when I read it, and I couldn't believe it that it was happening in part because a local entrepreneur had made an adult section available on Craigslist. Subsequently, I met with two victims who had been trafficked. One was a girl who was 16, was first trafficked when she was 14. She met me in Washington, D.C. I have a big blue leather couch in my office. Many of you have been there and have seen it. And this little tiny girl sat there and told me her harrowing story. And it started innocently. She's walking from her grandmother's house to her sister's house. And a guy kind of drives up and says, "Hey, Tiffany." She says, "My name's not Tiffany." He keeps engaging her in conversation. And finally he says, "Well, let me buy you lunch at McDonald's." So they have lunch at McDonald's, and you know how this evolves from there. And then they're boyfriend and girlfriend, and then they have to make money. And then all of a sudden, she's being trafficked. So this petite little girl sitting there on this big blue leather couch, and I say to her, "How many times a night were you forced to have sex?" She turned to me and said, "Between 10 and 14 times a night." Now, she finally escaped. That same year, I did a ride-along with law enforcement on International Boulevard in Oakland. Alameda County's District Attorney Nancy O'Malley had invited me there. She's all too familiar with this crime. She's also been one of the great leaders in the nation on this issue. There it was, trafficking right in front of my eyes. I learned about Romeo pimps and gorilla pimps, and I learned that the average age for trafficking victims to start being sold for sex was between the ages of 12 and 14. They are children. Think of your own kids or your grandkids or yourself when you were 12 or 13. Well, I realized that all politics is local, something that Tip O'Neill said many decades ago. And so I thought, we can do something right here in San Mateo County. And so I convened a group of law enforcement. Steve Wagstaffe and Susan Manheimer and many of the police chiefs from around the county joined me, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office. We all gathered to see what we could do. And over the course of a number of years, we created a protocol here in San Mateo County for zero tolerance for sex trafficking. Now, it was all done with extraordinary efforts by the law enforcement leadership in this county. And Steve Wagstaffe, my hat's off to you, not just for this issue, but for so many issues. Your leadership has really been remarkable. So everyone, I'm going to digress for a moment to say, I know my time's up, but I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to digress for a moment because yesterday in Washington, D.C., I'm part of a ending sexual violence bipartisan group, and we had a hearing on what are called sexual assault kits. We know them as rape kits. And around the country, there may be 600,000 or 800,000 that are sitting on shelves in various agencies that have never been tested. And it is criminal on so many levels because a rapist doesn't do it just once. They're oftentimes predators, or they then move on to more serious crime of murder, or they engage in burglary and robbery. So you can't believe that we have allowed this to go on for so long. And the reason why I'm saying this to you now is because in this county, under the leadership of Steve Wagstaffe, there is not one sexual assault kit that has not been tested. There's tens of thousands of them around the state, but not in this county. So we did create a protocol. It has now been embraced by all law enforcement in San Mateo County. And then we went on to do training events. And we trained persons at the airports because we know that they're oftentimes trafficked across state lines and across countries. And an organization of former flight attendants created an organization to do the training of flight attendants and those that work at the airports. We then went to the hotels and said, we want to train you as well. And so we did trainings there on top of that. So there's been an effort to do this on a many-pronged basis. So let me tell you this story. training does work. A clerk at La Quinta Inn in South San Francisco checked in a man traveling with 2 young women. The following night, he showed up with 2 other women. The clerk was suspicious, so the clerk calls the police. Her call resulted in the arrest of 3 traffickers, 2 of which are now serving time in prison, and the 4 young women plus a 5th were rescued and received medical attention and counseling. If you see something, say something. In some respects, it's become hackneyed, but I'm telling you, it really does work. I don't know this young woman's name. We don't need to know her name. We know that she stepped up, and because she stepped up, people's lives were saved. So these victims are scared and they're scarred. And oftentimes they are so enslaved and so subject to mind control that they need someone to pull them out from where they are. So it's really very important that we engage in this conversation today. And if you think it's still not something that I can kind of get behind because I don't quite understand it, let me tell you another story. It's my final story. Someone calls my office maybe a year or so ago from Millbrae. She says, I think there's something going on next door. We reported it to our wonderful law enforcement task force. It took them about a year. But as a result of that neighbor in Millbrae calling my office, and then we moved it through the process, arrests were made in San Mateo, Chief Manheimer, in San Bruno, and in Millbrae. So there was a network at work there. So you don't need to be a hotel clerk. Don't need to be law enforcement. Just need to be yourself and look at opportunities in the community to help out. There is a wonderful house called Freedom House, and I think they have a display here. They don't get a dime, not a dime of government money. I've been to Freedom House. I've sat with the young women trying to rebuild their lives. There's many things each and every one of us can do to help change this horrific set of circumstances going on right under our collective noses. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, and that's San Mateo County District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe. Steve is a lifelong resident of San Mateo County and has been with the San Mateo County District Attorney's Office for 42 years. He was elected as DA in 2010 and re-elected in 2014. Steve served as the 2016 president of the California District Attorneys Association, and he is actively involved in the leadership of Redwood City Rotary, the Sequoia YMCA, and the Service League of San Mateo County. I share San Mateo's great pride and gratitude that we have this uncompromising and relentless law enforcement professional at the helm in our county. It is widely known in the criminal underworld that San Mateo is not the place you want to get caught. So I give you our District Attorney, Steve Wagstaffe.
Thank you, Maureen. That was very kind. I've just been around a long time. Outlasted everybody else. And I do think it's unfair, Pamela, that I have to follow Congresswoman Speier. That is not what anybody wants to do. But thank you very much for your kind words. There's the 140 men and women who do the work and make it happen in our office. But it was about 6 years ago that in our county a fire was lit. And it was at that meeting that Congresswoman Speier described, because before that, we would occasionally get cases, we would prosecute them, but when it came to this crime, we thought, you know what, we don't have an International Boulevard. We do not have a Tenderloin. We do not have a First Street in San Jose. But it was right under our very eyes. And working, having lit that fire, having put the kindling together and lit that fire, it has really launched. And working with our wonderful police chiefs, including Chief Manheimer, the leadership of Chief Barberini, working with our federal partners like the Northern Regional Intelligence Team here, led by Mike Senna. Every month now, there is an outing of law enforcement to go out and wipe this off our streets. Has it had an impact? Well, I'm here to tell you it has. And I base that on what law enforcement's bringing to us. Because for a crime, remember, a crime of human trafficking that did not exist in California law. There was no such crime a decade ago. There was pimping and pandering, but there was no such crime as human trafficking, and there is now. And we prosecute those cases, sometimes such as the case that Congresswoman Speier just mentioned, where it was in the 3 different cities. Well, we work with our partners in the federal government, the United States Attorney, who took that case and hammered those people, convicted them and hammered them for the slavery they were engaged in. But just here in our county, in terms of the pimping, pandering, and human trafficking cases that we're dealing with, is it being seen? Are people paying attention? Well, just think of the last couple of years. Back in 2015, in our county, we dealt with 15 pimping, pandering cases and 7 cases of the legal human trafficking. Now understand, when we use the word pimping, pandering, that's human trafficking. But legally under the California Penal Code, to be what we call human trafficking, it must be a victim, a woman who is woman or man, who is under the age of 18, or if over 18, was compelled into it by force or threat, as opposed to the cajoling or the case that we just are prosecuting now, where the young woman who is 19 married her 39-year-old pimp, and creating a whole different set. But that does not legal. But it is human trafficking, and don't ever think it's not on that line. But I said in 2015 we had 22 of these human trafficking cases. Last year in 2016, we had 59. It's out there. That's the point. It's there, and by law enforcement going out there on those monthly ventures, plus all of law enforcement being trained in it, with a coordinator, Mike Brosnan, who was mentioned, who was out there training our local law enforcement, going out and speaking to groups. Just as the Congresswoman described, we are raising awareness. But we're not done. There's a long road to travel here. Because while there's some great ideas and all, what I want to describe for you today is a single case that my office prosecuted. And it occurred not too far from here, at the Red Roof Inn, is where it started. But the story goes back further. Our victim, Jane Doe, which is exactly what she was known at the entire time. That's how she was addressed at trial. That is how she is listed in the probation report for sentencing. We are helping and protecting the identity of these victims. Jane Doe grew up in Eureka, California. Her mother was a drug addict. Her father was out of the home. She was living with her grandmother and grandfather, and her life was wonderful. She was going to Catholic elementary schools and doing everything that a 12-year-old girl ought to be able to enjoy in life. Unfortunately, at age 12, her grandfather passed away, and her grandmother decided to move down here to the Bay Area in order to be near her sister. Her grandmother was 74 years old. Well, unfortunately, she fell into a climate where she started getting into some drugs, some rebellion, as teenagers will do. And when she was age 16, she met a man on the streets, almost as you describe. You know, the man out there trolling for new slaves so he can do his slavery. And he found Jane Doe. And at age 16, he, through cajoling and everything else, I will be your boyfriend. And she became a prostitute working for him. She became his slave in all respects of the word, exactly as you describe. And on an occasion, she was brought to the Red Roof Inn by this man named Matthew Graves, 29 years old, making lots of money on her, making her engage in sex just as you described all night at the Red Roof Inn. And what brought it to our law enforcement attention? While they were at the Red Roof Inn, she said, I don't want to have to work tonight. And he beat the tar out of her. He absolutely beat her bloody. And she went running out of the room down to the hotel clerk, who unfortunately had not been trained, still one of the people. That's why I say we still have things to do. And he gave her some money to get a ride to San Francisco. Well, the story turns out fine because she went to San Francisco and she decided, I don't need to take this. And she called San Francisco police, who asked her where it happened. And they said it was at this motel in Burlingame. And she went. They drove her down to Peninsula Hospital, just a few miles from here. Still hadn't called the police. There's still training to do, our local police. The doctors at Peninsula Hospital did. They called up to Burlingame PD, and that started our case. And that was a case where she had been engaged in this for months, and every classic word was a slave for this man. And he had been doing that with other women, making lots of money. When we went and looked and did the investigation at that hotel over here, we found that in the prior 4 months, he had checked in there 27 times with multiple different women, just as you're describing. It fits the mold. But we had those records. We found out who he was. He was arrested. He was in custody. From the jail, he kept calling her, because she went back to her 74-year-old grandmother and was living with her. Got some initial services were provided, was back living with her grandmother, because the case took almost a year and a half to get to trial. Strategy for the defense is delay it as long as you can. The victim may be gone. She may have run off. It's tough. But her grandmother was, at 74, absolutely was going to make this happen and kept her on the line. Got her an attorney. We got her funding through our victim program to help survive out there. She was getting phone calls. At one point, she came into us and said, I really don't want to participate anymore. Not uncommon. She did that. She came into us, told us that, and we did a little legwork and found out he had been calling her from the jail, going through another line, outside line, then transferred over to her, and calling her, telling her, you got to do me this, doing the whole sweet talk. You got to back out of this. You can't do this to me. They're going to lock me up. Well, because of her grandmother and the great work I think the Burlingame Police Department did, as all our law enforcement do, she testified at this trial last February, just 4 months ago. She testified at that trial for that jury for a day and a half. She laid it out there, what she had done. She talked about her life. We were able to get the hotel clerk to come in and testify. Of course, we had to go get him out of bed because he didn't come to court when he was supposed to, because he had a new video game the night before, and he had stayed up all night playing video, so we had to go wake him up. But we got him. We had a patient judge. Came in. He testified. We put on one of our county experts, Sergeant Schwartz from South San Francisco PD, to talk about the dynamic, what these slaves go through. It was really compelling testimony. And the defense put on their case, and their suggestion was, he didn't do anything. This was all just basically friendship. He didn't know what she was doing. And all those bruises and that beating, it was argued to the jury by the defense that the grandmother did that. This is what we deal with in court. However, in San Mateo County, with a great community and great jurors, they very quickly convicted him of multiple counts of human trafficking, pimping, and pandering. He is set for sentencing. You will see it in the newspaper. The papers are covering it, which is what we want. We want Matthew Graves' name to be out there for everybody to see. And he is facing, on the day my prosecutor filed her sentencing brief this week, and we are asking for 36 years to life in prison for Mr. Graves. The road still has to be traveled. We are very grateful in law enforcement for all the support we have from all of our constituency, all of the members of our community in doing this. But the road still needs to be traveled. We cannot be lax. We cannot forget. We need to continue. We need to see if we can find some government money for the Freedom House and people like that, so that my prosecutors, my office can walk into court and take these slavers and let them know that we won't speak to what's going on in other counties, but if you come to San Mateo County to do it, we're going to put all our resources, we're going to convict you, and we're going to try and lock you up for the rest of your life. That's our goal. I appreciate all the help of you. I appreciate all of you being here, because that tells me you're interested and you'll help spread this message. thank you, and thank you for your help.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Senator Jerry Hill. Senator Hill represents us in the California State Senate, having been the mayor of San Mateo, a member of the County Board of Supervisors, and a member of the State Assembly. Jerry has been a champion of legislation to prevent human trafficking and aid survivors of this crime. His work on this issue builds on a track record of successful legislation to improve health and safety, protect consumers, modernize outdated laws, and increase transparency in government. Jerry has been a strong and tireless advocate for our communities. He is also a mentor to many of our community leaders, including me, and he serves as a role model of public service for all of us. Thank you so much for being here today, Jerry.
Thank you, Maureen, and what an honor it is to be here and to participate in such a needed event. It's sad that we are here, but it's so necessary for us to participate. And thank you for the sponsors to help fund this and for the leadership that we have with Susan and the police department. And Maureen, thank you for making that happen. It's and certainly before our very eyes, just brings it home, I think, for everyone. It's interesting to hear we all have a role to play. And in Sacramento, we're trying to play that role. And we're doing it now because our mission, we share the mission that you have. And that mission is to sound the alarm, and that alarm is bringing us to action, and it has. We're focusing resources like never before in response to the human trafficking that, as we know, is now the world's fastest growing criminal enterprise. We see this as a priority. Last year, more human trafficking was reported in California than in any other state. And it's interesting, Jackie was talking about those rape kits and the fact that they have not been investigated, they have not been identified. And in California, about 3 years ago, it was brought to our attention of the tremendous backlog. And immediately, I remember we authorized, I think it was $25 million as an emergency fund to go to the Department of Justice to start looking and analyzing those kits to bring that number down. It was an embarrassment and something we don't want to see again because we need the justice that can come from that. And today our efforts in Sacramento have ranged from support of law enforcement efforts to investigate and prosecute in order to bring those responsible for these crimes to justice, to providing social services for victims and training for hotel workers, as Steve was talking about how necessary that is. We're determined to address every aspect of human trafficking as we learn more about the problem and better understand its complexities, which I think can be so nuanced that it is so critical. With the support of the electorate and the passage of Proposition 35 a few years ago, we have been able to increase the penalty for trafficking crimes. We also recognize unambiguously that those who are trafficked are victims. They're not criminals. In further support of this mandate, last year the legislature passed and Governor Brown signed a bill which makes laws related to prostitution and loitering with the intent to commit prostitution inapplicable to people under the age of 18. We also did away with mandatory minimum jail terms that had been imposed for some acts of prostitution. And this year we're working on a bill whose goal is to keep children from being exploited for labor or sex and to ensure that students identified as victims of human trafficking are provided with the services that they need. We note that often it is that hotel or motel employee who find themselves on the front lines of the fight against human trafficking. And so we are looking for ways to help them identify and support their observations. And just this next Monday, I chair the Business and Professions Committee in the Senate. There's a bill coming before us that will require this California Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, as part of their education and training for their professionals, to help them, as Rich Hedges is here, a member of that board. This will require them to include in that training the recognition of those signs, because they're on the front lines every day and they'll see those victims or hear it in something that's said, and they can do something with that. The Senate recently passed my legislation to improve California's judicial screening process of requests for court orders that would allow minors to marry. This is Senate Bill 273. It will help prevent situations where children have been forced into marriage or pressured into marriage against their will. This bill issue, and it's amazing, sometimes people say government doesn't work fast enough. But it was in March, late March of this year, I was called by a constituent, a 16-year-old constituent, who told me that in her school, a 12-year-old girl was planning to marry a 28-year-old from another country. And that the school knew of this. The school was concerned, but they had no way of doing anything about it. I said, that can't be so. Not in California. But when you look at the law, there is no age limit for marriage in California. There's no age limit, one. And two, all that's required for a minor to get married in California is to have one parent sign a form and have a judge check a box. And that grants the marriage. Nothing else is required. So I immediately amended a bill that I had. I said, this can't continue. I amended a bill and established an age limit, 18, a minimum age to marry in California. Yeah. And, well, thank you. Unfortunately, as much legislation does as it goes through the process, it didn't make it in that form. A lot of opposition from that. You would be amazed. American Civil Liberties Union, for one. Marriage is a right. No age restriction applied. So the bill now does many things. It requires that if you are planning to marry, that the Family Court Services has to interview privately. Each individual has to determine whether there is any coercion, any abuse, any problem that comes before it. And then if there is, it goes to Child Protective Services, and then they investigate and do it. And now the judge has to interview people individually, in chambers, alone, to determine if there is any coercion in this involved. And they can now make the decision. As I met with one of the judges in San Mateo County and Family Court, he said, just change it from may to shall take some action for a judge. Give us the authority and the responsibility to do something and make a decision, not just check a box is all we have to do. So hopefully we're trying to even strengthen it now. It's in the Assembly in the second House, so hopefully it will be a little stronger than it is, and we can provide some safe, because in the country where this person was come to marry this 12-year-old, marriage isn't allowed there under 18. But here and then to go back. It sounds like statutory rape to me. Well, we're working in California to update and expand existing law that requires certain types of businesses and publicly frequented sites, such as emergency room areas or hospitals, urgent care centers, and bus and light rail stations, to post a notice on their premises about human trafficking, including information about nonprofit organizations that will provide prevention and support services to witnesses and victims. There's also legislation that would add a hotline text number that victims and people who witness trafficking can contact support services for. So we're trying to do something. It's not going away. As Steve mentioned, we're recognizing it more, but the problem isn't going away. We're advancing efforts to provide greater financial and technical assistance to county district attorney offices for the prosecution of human trafficking cases, so Steve can continue the great work that he has been doing. And we are moving ahead with legislation that would expand the state's Safe at Home program to include victims of human trafficking. The Safe at Home program currently enables the survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault and stalking to protect their home, work, and school addresses from disclosure, to keep them as anonymous as possible and private. As our work in Sacramento combating human trafficking moves forward, I know that our efforts have your backing. And we are well supported by a larger coalition of advocacy organizations, social service agencies, district attorneys, and law enforcement. And thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for allowing this opportunity today to continue our focus and never lose sight that it is before our very eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. So our final speaker today is Supervisor Carole Groom. Supervisor Groom served on the San Mateo City Council for 9 years with 2 terms as mayor, and has served on the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors for 8 years with 2 terms as board chair. Carole has distinguished herself as a tireless advocate for kids, healthcare, education, parks, and the environment. She was recently reappointed to the prestigious California Coastal Commission, where she is dedicated to preserving the natural beauty of our state, while she remains devoted to protecting our county's single greatest asset, our children. So thank you, Carole, for sharing your day with us.
Maureen, thank you. And Pamela, thank you, and the entire committee for putting this wonderful event today. And thanks for all of you being here on one of this beautiful Saturday. And hopefully together we're learning some new things. I certainly have learned a couple things already. I want to just talk a little bit about what the county does in providing services for victims. You heard what our criminal justice system does, the laws that the state legislature is passing, but we often have the sad task of taking care of victims. And so here's just a couple of things that we've been working on for several years now to hopefully take care of women and children who are subject to this terrible, terrible thing. A couple years ago, we hired former San Francisco Police Department Captain and Deputy Chief Mike Brosnan to be our sexual trafficking coordinator, program coordinator. He was involved, as when Jackie alluded to, some issues in South San Francisco, and then he retired. And so fortunately, he's now helping the county coordinate our efforts and our activities regarding sexual trafficking. Our county health system and our county behavioral health care and our county human services often provide services for victims. Some of you may know that we have something at the county called the Keller Center, which is a center for children victims of sexual assault. We have upped our programming at the Keller Center so that sexually attacked children have a safe environment with social workers, medical personnel to help them when they come in. We have many multidisciplinary teams who meet regularly to share the best practices and develop new services and new programs as we learn that we even need more solving than we have in the past. Our health coverage unit assists victims of trafficking in connecting with the proper physicians, with the proper health insurance coverage, with proper social services, with proper psychiatric services, so that they can become whole people again. Our family health services and our children family services, public health nurse is trained to recognize those red flags of human trafficking. Public health nurses also visit in the home when these things are discovered. They'll go out to the home and try to work with the family members, make sure that the child or the young woman has enough services, enough help. If not, we find new places for them to go. We get them out of their home situation and put them in a more safe environment. Once a client has been identified as a possible victim, we get them immediately to a public health nurse. So that public health nurse can decide whether they need additional help, what kind of additional services they need, just become a case manager for those women and for those children. To date, more than 10 illegal massage parlors have been shut down in unincorporated areas of San Mateo County. And I want to credit Senator Hill. When he was on the city council and as a supervisor, he worked very hard to create the ordinances that allowed us to shut down massage parlors. And that work is continuing with our San Mateo Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Monks and now Sheriff Bolanos have gone aggressively after establishments where human trafficking may be happening. And the county is proud that there are currently no illegal massage parlors in any of the areas that fall under our service area. The last couple of things that we do are involve citizens. As you know, cities and counties have commissions. We have 2 commissions that have been working on human trafficking. The first is our Commission on the Status of Women. They have helped to distribute posters at restaurants and bars throughout the county. They have knocked on doors of businesses. They have talked about the issues. They have distributed many, many pamphlets. They hold, this has become an item on their monthly agendas so that we can be discussed. They have hosted speakers who have provided information about human trafficking and how to combat it. Mike Brosnan was one of the folks who helped them set up some of their work. They make visits in the county jail to talk to women who have been arrested for sexual prostitution and try to help them understand the services that are available for them when they leave jail, the education community, how they can need to get them to the community college or help them with the GED to finish their high school education, how important that all is. Our other commission is the Youth Commission. The Youth Commission has conducted panel discussions on human trafficking to educate the young people in high schools, the young people in middle schools, and about the nature of this problem and what they can do, especially call the police. Call the police if you think one of your classmates is hanging with the wrong crowd or you see them getting into a car. But we've tried to train both our Women's Commission and our Youth Commission that being the eyes and the ears in the community is one of the most important jobs that they can have. And so that's just a snapshot of the things that we are doing in the county. And again, I want to thank Maureen for asking the county to participate today so that we can share in this community's willingness and ability to fight this crime and help the victims who have suffered from it. Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you, Carole. And thank you to all of our distinguished speakers for being here today to share your expertise and thoughts with us. So next on the agenda is our panel discussion. So why don't we all take a stand and just do a quick stretch while our panel comes up to the front here. Thank you. Okay. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panel moderator, Warren Dale. Warren is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a fellow of the American Academy of Therapists for Traumatic Stress. He has conducted trauma training all over the world, specifically in helping to develop caring response strategies for survivors of the rape camps in Bosnia, sexual assault in South Africa, and human trafficking in Sri Lanka. Warren was one of the founders of the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, and he continues to work with them today. Please welcome Warren Dale to the podium. Thank you, Warren.
Thank you so much, Maureen, and indeed it is so wonderful to see all of you here. A couple of things. One is we are adjusting our schedule a little bit. We want you to see the video and hear from people who have been through this experience after you've had some context for it. And so Brian Wu is going to set that context in terms of what kind of trafficking, defining those kinds, and then I'll be talking just very briefly about the 4 factors that impact trauma. For a couple of reasons. One is, as you observe what they've gone through, you can monitor those factors. But secondly, we've been hearing stories already. And so we have 2 things for you. One is we have cards that are on the aisles there. If you have a specific question to a person, please put their name on and the question. Secondly, if you just have a general question, write that on there as well. But the second thing is that you have your programs. And if you find yourself having certain kinds of response, we know that, again, these kind of stories trigger and activate memories of some sort, whether it's for other people, whether it's some journey that you've taken yourself. So jot down some thoughts on that program. And you can use that in terms of talking later with people around you, talking with people who are at the booths outside in terms of support services. But also, Amanda is here from Rape Crisis Center, and she's here and available as well. So again, this is an opportunity not only to think about what's going on in your neighborhood, but also to monitor ourselves in terms of how we are able to deal with these. The 4 factors that affect the impact of trauma are very simple. The type of experience that a person has gone through, whether that's a situation that's started by someone that they know in the family, somebody that's in the neighborhood, or some stranger. All of that is around the type and, of course, what specifically they've gone through. The second factor is their individual differences, things about their coping mechanisms, previous traumas or abuse that they've gone through, what their self-esteem is. Religious experiences can be positive or negative in terms of impacting how this experience impacts them. The third factor is the support system. And you can see how very valuable you are in terms of being a support system. You know, for many, many, many years, when people would talk about child abuse, that people didn't believe them. The support system closed to them. And so we're the safe people in our neighborhoods. We are the safe people in terms of our neighborhoods. And then the fourth factor is how long they're in the situation and what their response is during. When we treat people in terms of coming through these experiences, I'm monitoring those 4 factors. And in terms of providing the kind of support system they need, we're monitoring that as well. And so I now get to introduce our learned panel, just a great panel. Brian Wu is co-founder of the Bay Area Trafficking Coalition, designed to build awareness and collaboratives. For 16 years, he has been in a vocational ministry experience. He previously worked in the aerospace industry and decided to combine that outer space to the inner space of working as an associate pastor of the Great Grace Community Covenant Church. Another one, Susan Manheimer, chief of San Mateo County. Previously, she was a captain in the San Francisco Police Department and worked in the Tenderloin District of San Francisco. She was the point person for the police chief in the area of human trafficking. Denicia Cormier holds a master's degree in social work from UC Berkeley and works as a supervisor with the San Mateo County Children and Family Services. Denicia noticed in her working with foster youth that the amount of child exploitation was moved and was personally moved, therefore, to pursue training from the Oakland-based survivor exploitation called MISSY, motivating, inspiring, supporting, and servicing sexually exploited children. She's a leader and coordinator of her annual Rise Above Prevention and Early Intervention Girls Conference. And lastly, Jenee Littrell is a member of the director of the Safe and Supportive Schools of San Mateo County, the Office of Education. Before coming to San Mateo County in San Diego, she was one of the first to start a guide on how schools could help prevent human trafficking. And for the past 8 years, she's been a leader in providing training for school districts all over the nation so that the children can feel safe at school. And now, to tell us about the different kinds of trafficking, Brian Wu.
Thank you, Warren. I'd like to echo thanks, not just for taking time out of your Saturday afternoon, but also we realize this is an issue that's sometimes very uncomfortable to discuss, so we also appreciate the fact that you've just come out to be a part of this dialogue, and so we're doubly thankful that you're here today. You've heard from a lot of experts. We know that this issue is new to some of you, so what I'm going to do is, before we dive into the film and more panel discussion, I want to just kind of lay some groundwork so that we all kind of have a common lens to look at this issue as we continue our discussion. But before we do that, I know I have like 7 minutes left, but I have to take a selfie with you all for social media, so I'll try to get as many of you as possible. No, I got it. There we go. Then it's not a selfie if Susan takes it. Yeah. All right, so diving into a basic definition of human trafficking. So we're going to back up a little bit. There are 3 elements of human trafficking that would be helpful, I think, for us to think about. So the first one is control. There is a trafficker who is controlling a trafficking victim, okay? And they use many methods, but the first element is control. The second element is the means by which they control. And you heard a little bit of this already. We look at force, fraud, or coercion happening in a human trafficking case. And I'll talk about those a little bit more. But so far we have a trafficker who's controlling a victim, and their means are force, fraud, or coercion. And the third element is there's a purpose. The trafficker's purpose is that they're exploiting the victim. In other words, they're going to make money off of this victim, and typically it's through either making them work without pay or selling them for commercial sex. So we have a trafficker controlling a victim, and their means are force, fraud, or coercion with a purpose of exploitation. Okay, so that's kind of what we're working with in a human trafficking case. One thing to note is that smuggling is not the same thing as human trafficking. When you've got a smuggling case, you're crossing borders. A human trafficking victim, even though the traffickers may sometimes move their victims around to control them, they don't have to be moved. They don't have to cross any borders. Human trafficking is a different crime than smuggling. I know people get that confused occasionally. Force, fraud, and coercion. Let's look at that a little bit more. You heard about the beating from the Red Roof case. That's a typical use of force. There's all kinds of torture and abuse that happens that traffickers use to control their victims. They often use drugs to get them addicted to substances to make them more dependent on the traffickers. But the Hollywood version of someone just being grabbed off the street is very much the exception. More often they are deceived. There's fraud involved. And so perhaps someone's coming from another country thinking they're coming for a modeling job, but they end up working in a residential brothel. Or someone thinks they're applying for a job at a restaurant, but they end up getting forced to work in an illicit massage business. Or we heard the cases, Congresswoman Speier and DA Wagstaffe talked about a Romeo pimp romancing a young woman who thinks that he's going to be her boyfriend, but actually he's exploiting her. And so those are examples of fraud or deception that happen in human trafficking cases. So we got force, we have fraud, and then coercion is also any type of threat toward the victim or their family or friends. So the trafficker may say, hey, I know where your mom lives. I'm going to come after her if you don't do what I tell you. Or the trafficker may get the victim to prostitute themselves once, and then he says, if you don't continue to do what I want you to do, I'm going to tell all your friends and family that you're a prostitute, and that may be enough to keep them quiet and keep them under control. They use all kinds of lies and brainwash their victims. So someone comes from another country, and perhaps they tell them, if you talk to anybody, then law enforcement's going to come arrest you and throw you in jail, which is not the truth, but they begin to fill them with all these lies as a means of psychological coercion, so that keeps them under control. So something that's really important to note is that just because they're not locked in a bedroom or chained to a bed, that physically they may be able to walk away, they're not really free, because the traffickers are experts at all this emotional and psychological coercion and control, that they manipulate their victims so that even though physically they may be able to walk away, they are not really free, and they are still under their control, okay? Now, the one caveat to force, fraud, and coercion, and we heard a little bit about this already, is if you're under 18 and you're being sold for commercial sex, you're automatically a sex trafficking victim. We don't have to look at the force, fraud, and coercion, because our laws say that you are not old enough to consent to sex, and so you're not old enough to be sold for sex as well, okay? Then real briefly, let me just talk about what it may look like around here in the Bay Area. We talk about two types of trafficking, broad categories of sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and sometimes they intermingle. But sex trafficking, one of the myths, I think, is that there are women who are brought here for sex trafficking. But in 2012, our Attorney General did a report where of the commercial sexual exploitation cases in California, 72% of those cases were United States citizens, girls who were born here. They've grown up in our neighborhoods, they go to our schools, they go to our Starbucks. And so I think that's an important thing to know, that it's happening to our kids who've grown up here. Also, it's not just women and girls. You'll see in the video this amazing man named Russell who is a sex trafficking survivor. Also, sex trafficking happens on the streets. We heard about some of the tracks that happen in different Bay Area neighborhoods where street prostitution happens. But more and more, that's moving online. We heard about Craigslist. There are also websites like Backpage where women are advertised online. And then, as I alluded to earlier, there are illicit massage businesses in neighborhoods around the Bay Area. There are residential brothels in the neighborhoods all over the Bay Area. And then labor trafficking, typically people come to this country under a guise of a false job. That's not what they thought. They are abused, their vulnerabilities are exploited by the traffickers, they're not paid. The traffickers profit off of them, and they essentially enslave them. And this happens in There are domestic servants this has happened to, so people that we call nannies or housekeepers that come to this country to work in someone's home. This happens in people working in agriculture, in skilled nursing facilities, in custodial services, food vendors on the street, people working in restaurants, hotels, construction industry. So these are all happening, again, right before our very eyes, and it's often very hard to spot, and that's why it's really important that we begin to understand what the red flags are and what to do if we see something like this happening. All right, and so the last thing I really think is important for all of you to know is that everybody can do something. And so, part of what we do at the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition is to help not just the professionals all talk to each other, make sure we're collaborating and sharing resources and not duplicating efforts, but we want every individual of the Bay Area to plug in to make the unique contribution that each one of you can make, because we all have unique spheres of influence, we all have unique skills and backgrounds and experiences that we can contribute to the movement to really make a difference. And so what we'd like to leave you with is what we call our 10-10-10, and that is, what can you do in 10 minutes, what can you do in 10 days, what can you do in 10 months? And so everybody's gonna have a unique 10-10-10, but we believe everybody can do something. And so we have a table out there for the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition. We would love to just have you come by and give you more information about that. So thank you.
Thank you, and now we'll view the video.
You have to break someone to put them in human trafficking. Like, you literally have to break their heart, their mind, their soul, their ego, everything.
Human trafficking is stealing someone's life and their body.
Human trafficking is a commercial sexual exploitation of children, of minors. It's a third party benefiting off the exchange of sex with a minor and an adult.
A victim is controlled by either force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of economic exploitation. In other words, someone is using them to make money, and that could be either through forced labor or that could be through commercial sex.
It's not just happening to girls, it's happening to boys. The fact that, as Brian mentioned, labor trafficking is as rampant as sex trafficking, and those aren't always exclusive. Oftentimes they will involve both. So a labor trafficking case will also involve sexual exploitation.
Exploiting the fact that they didn't have a family, exploiting the fact that they didn't have money, exploiting the fact that they have a low self-esteem and no one ever did share or show any love towards them.
A lot of people enter into this issue by a global lens. They hear of it happening in India or Cambodia or all across Africa. And in some ways, that's almost easier to compartmentalize it as, oh, I'm so sorry that happens there, and what can I do to help? It's a whole nother thing to say, wow, it's happening in my neighborhood. Should I still let my kids go to the mall? What about when I go to the park? So when it gets close, it gets vulnerable for people.
And that's happening all over the Bay Area, all over the country, and has been happening for quite a while. That's human trafficking. And my story begins like a lot of people. I'm from suburbia. I grew up in the Bay Area.
My mom had me, she was 14 going on 15, and my dad was 19. So like, it was kind of like a struggle. Like, he didn't want her to have me and she had me, so it was like a distance between us. So he was there, but not mentally there.
I mean, I think that I grew up on the best street in the world with the best neighbors and the best, just families. We're all friends with each other. The kids were friends with each other.
I think by the time I was 5, my mother had a nervous breakdown, she would disappear on me for days on end. I was left to fend for myself even at 5 years old.
Then my parents got divorced, and like many families that I knew, even if everything looks okay, you've got a lot of kids that are lost and people have lost track of them, and they're trying to go to work, and now you have single parents that have their own lives they're trying to figure out.
A lot of times poverty leaves you vulnerable. Coming from a home where there's not a lot of support and there's not a lot of funds, you find yourself in a place where you have to make a way. And this is where I see a lot of girls start to get trapped into the life.
This never happened to me before. Here I'm this girl from suburbia going, what do I do?
100% of the young women I've worked with have been sexually molested. And it hasn't been by a stranger. It's been very much in the home.
Our landlord, who was our friend, would come over and molest me. It didn't occur to me until my adult life that that's how my mom was paying the rent, was by basically pimping me out to the landlord.
I just kind of went back and forth from foster homes to foster homes and just distant, and I kind of went on a suicide watch in the 5th grade just because my mother always would tell me that she was coming to get me and she never would.
That's when I went into a group home, and this was an all-boys group home.
Our own American children, especially those connected with the foster care system, have been predisposed to really being potential human trafficking victims.
There was this kid who was about 16, and we totally befriended each other. And I remember the first night he actually came into my room and raped me. He would do these really horrible things, and yet the next day, he was all buddy-buddy, best friends.
So at the age of 14, I decided to hang out with some friends after school, and it was pretty late, and I decided, it was time to go home. So I went to the bus stop, and I sat there for a while, and as I sat there, it was a car that pulled up, stopped, rolled the window down, and was like, "Do you need a ride?" And I was like, "No." So he drove off. Came back around the corner, I felt a presence behind me, and I turned around and it was him with the gun, and he was like, "Get in the car." I was scared, so I did what he told me to do. We drove for a while, and he told me to keep my head down so I wouldn't know where I was going.
And one day he was like, "Oh, we need to go out, and like, what are we gonna do?" He's like, "Well, first, you gotta go in this bathroom and make some money." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Yeah, just go in the bathroom. You'll find some guy, let him do what he wants. He'll pay you, and then we can go party."
Like, he did transformation pictures when the day he got me, and then he fixed me up, and then he did pictures of the day after he fixed me up and things like that.
Sure enough, within 5 minutes, this older white guy walks in there. We go into a stall, and he sits me on the toilet, and he unzips himself. And he basically forces me.
And what I got is what you call a gorilla pimp. If I do anything wrong, he'll put his hands on me. He didn't really care if it was the smallest thing, just whatever.
Pulled out a few $20 bills. I'm on the floor in the stall, lying in puke and blood. And, he threw some money. He's like, "I probably shouldn't pay for this. I've had better," and walked out.
I was told that somebody had a room, and I went there to stay. I was drugged and raped and filmed. And I did not remember, because the drugs take away your memory from the time you go to sleep to the time you wake up.
From that day, he described to me what I was supposed to do from that day forward, which was, exchange sex with men for money.
And then I was told I could not survive. I was told I would not get out. When they were done with me, they'd kill me. I was told not to go to the police or I would be arrested. As it got bigger and bigger, I realized that every time I go to a hospital, to the police, the doors would be shut on me.
The police, sometimes they help. Sometimes they help, and sometimes they don't. I had one where he picked me up and he took me around the corner, and I didn't know where we were going, but I looked up, the police station was right there, I could see it through the gate, and he was like, "I'm a cop, and if you don't let me have sex with you, then I'm taking you to jail." And I let him do it, and he let me go, and he told me who the other officer was and what time they were going to be out there, and be careful. And I was like, "Okay," and I left.
Without even checking on me, he just started picking up the money and counting the money. He's like, "Oh, okay, cool." And he's like, "Oh, now we can go celebrate your birthday." So this was my 11th birthday. That was the first time I felt like, okay, this is my life.
There's no choice. Nobody wakes up and thinks, "I want to sell my body over and over to multiple people that I don't know for multiple prices." There's just no way you could tell me that.
You think that a girl could be raped once and it turns into human trafficking now. People are not aware that most of the women in pornography are trafficked, and they are not even counted in the statistics. There's no regulation in the porn industry, and they make more money than ABC, CBS, and NBC all put together.
Their mind and body and soul doesn't want to be there, but they have to because they have no way of leaving. If they leave, it's either death for you or for someone in your family, and there's no way of leaving out of that unless you really have some type of help. And these exploiters are ruthless, okay? I've talked to exploiters in San Bruno County Jail, and they will tell you, we get up, we get dressed, we smell good, we get the nice car, all for the purpose of going out and catching that one girl. Catching that one girl that's trailing behind the rest, or that one girl who's kind of walking on her own or by herself, or with her head down. There's definitely a recipe. And then when you're out in these streets and you turn on the radio and you turn on the videos and you look at the magazines, everything is telling you it's over-sexualizing women, right?
They say you're going to be a model, you're going to be a star, you're going to be an actress, you're going to be this, you're going to do that, you're going to help your family. Your family's not going to ever be starving and things like that, but as soon as you get there, it's a totally different story and you're in something that you cannot get out of.
The only sense of value I had was as a sex object. The only tools I had to survive at that young age was through sex. And there was no hope for a future beyond that.
Especially, it hurts when you get lied to from someone that you think that's supposed to, you know, really love you and, oh, sorry.
And I spent 30, 40 years of my life not ever having any dreams or hopes for the future. And it allowed me to make some very bad decisions in my life when there is no tomorrow. I'm somebody who has a tomorrow now, and I have a future, and I have potential. And every day I wake up striving to live up to that full potential.
Again, we invite you to take care of yourselves. Sometimes the amount of information you receive in a situation like this is overwhelming. If you need to take a walk, take a walk. There are people who will walk with you. And again, take care of yourselves tonight as well. Sometimes we need to just coach other people in terms of what we're going through or what our needs are for that period of time, because they're expecting us as we interface with them to be just like we were yesterday. So again, take care of yourselves. And so now I turn it over to Chief Manheimer.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Can everyone hear me? No? Hello? You want me to try that one? No, it should be good. It should be good. Okay. Hello? Anyone? Yes? No? No. Okay. Can you hear me in the back? All those San Mateo Police Department personnel back there? Okay, thank you very much. So that was quite sobering. You know, my past life was spent mostly as a police officer in the Tenderloin, and there it was very evident every single day. And there was not a lot of hope to extricate victims. You know, it's funny, down here in San Mateo County, you see a lot more of the female victims. Up there in the city, you saw a lot of young boys, and that really brought it home to me. And it's so nice to know that we have systems and processes, and we are working as a safety net to try and extricate and have resources for these victims. So for law enforcement, this has been a dirty little secret of society from forever. And for us to see this room fill up with people who want to help and make themselves aware and find out what's going on and what they can do is absolutely gratifying. So thank you to each and every one of you. Community leaders, recognize so many of you here. It's amazing. It's very gratifying. So I'm not going to go into the case too much because I think you know and you have heard a lot about that. What I do want to share with you is that every day here in San Mateo County, it's happening. Why? We're not the urban center. We're not East Fruitvale, 14th. We're not the Tenderloin at Jones and Eddy, and we're not down in San Jose. But what we have are those urban anchors that afford a huge amount of transitory trafficking of those with a huge demand and marketplace. We know if we can decrease demand, we can decrease the market. And so that is one of our new strategies that we're looking for. I'm gonna share a little bit about what it looks like here in San Mateo County via the internet, advertisements, phone outcall services, storefront brothels, prostitutes are delivered to our hotels, our motels, and other venues, residential houses in our neighborhoods, upscale rental apartments. This knows no zip code, folks. It's in every zip code, as are the victims. And we are right now finding that there's probably 25 to 30 ads for prostitutes in San Mateo County every single day. As you can imagine, 1/3 of those, likely at least, are underage. And so the legislature has made it a little easier on us to focus on those underage. As they said earlier, you no longer have to prove force or fear. To put out someone for sex trafficking who's a juvenile is alone trafficking, and that's been really great. And we've really focused on that. So you have these high demand corridors. You know the Super Bowl was here. What was law enforcement doing? They were out in huge, multi-jurisdictional 9 Bay Area County task forces trying to put a lid on the trafficking that was going on. They brought in women and men from all over the country to service these kinds of events and conferences. And they actually have a circuit that some of these are on. So here we are mostly, as I said, undercover. Yes, I think Congressman now State Senator Jerry Hill talked a lot about massage parlor brothels. I know Supervisor Groom. In San Mateo, when Jerry was here and they started to put that first brothel massage legislation together, we shut down 20 to 30 illicit brothels in the city of San Mateo. We just again did that probably, 3 or 4 years ago. I'm looking at my crime reduction unit in the back. We had another big emphasis on it about 3 or 4 years ago. That legislation that Jerry started here with many victims advocates and our police department is now statewide. And we have been very instrumental in getting the brothels. So they're trafficked from the urban centers. You know what's interesting is that prostitute you see walking in the Tenderloin or walking on East 14th is also being advertised at the same time on Backpage, on Red Door, on some of these internet sites. So when that gentleman in Los Gatos ordered a prostitute from some, what he thought was a high-call massage internet site down in Los Gatos, he actually got a pimp who brought a young woman from East 14th Street in Oakland, and later that gentleman ended up dead. You remember that case, Steve? It was a very big case. So you don't know who and what influences are also being brought into your city. I'll talk to you about a case later we came to respond to as a robbery, just a brutal strong-arm robbery in one of our hotels, and our astute officers who are now trained recognized it as a human trafficking issue. So what are we doing about it? Congresswoman Jackie Speier, who we all know and love in this room and know is very determined, called and convened law enforcement and all of the partners who can involve and touch human trafficking in 2013. And we knew when she called out that challenge to us to set out and do something about it, we rose to that challenge. And so our human trafficking task force through the San Mateo County Police Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, supported by the Board of Supervisors and all of our local councils, 14 of our local city councils put together a resolution affirming support for zero tolerance for human trafficking. And the Board of Supervisors have made good on that. Measure A and now Measure K have put funds into a countywide coordinator. And we have a tremendous web of safety net that we are putting together of what we call our Stop Human Trafficking Task Force. And this task force, since 2013, I am the current commander of it, and we have a north, central, and south operation in which every single month we put out a multi-pronged approach because, as Chief Barberini will tell you from San Bruno sitting here, we have to deal with the reduction of demand as well. We go after the pimps, we go after the Johns, and we try and, when we get the prostitutes, get them in and bring them to victim services, because we know that a victim-centered approach in not arresting the prostitutes, but first affording them the opportunity to try and work with victim services and treatment is the only way we are really going to help to get them out of the cycle. Most of these victims are either dependent upon for emotional dependence, financial dependence, or fearful of not ever making it out alive. They don't disclose to us in law enforcement, most of the time, they've been trained to be afraid of us. And so working with side by side, the victims' advocates, who can then turn around and provide them a non-law enforcement safe face, we can together and have really, really intervened in the whole process. And so the training we talk about is for all facets, for the indicators, for the public, for events like this with you all. We've trained in the city of San Mateo, and I'm looking at some of our trainers. We have a lot of our law enforcement here today. The chamber partnered with us, and we were able to bring all of our hospitality industry together. And I'm talking about gardeners and front desk clerks from the local hotels along the Bayshore. And this has been replicated up and down with all of the zones, all of the chiefs, the sheriff, the police chiefs association, our partners at the DA, and even probation in the schools. We are all putting this out there so that, like you, they'll be aware and they will be absolutely hearkened and heartened by the brutality of what's going on before our very eyes. And so we've done this training, but we've also done it for law enforcement. Law enforcement has really had to turn around the idea that these hardened, fearful suspects, prostitutes, who we intervene with, are really many times recruited at 12 to 14 years old and not trained to trust us. And so we have had to intervene. And so I think we're making a tremendous dent. I was going to share with you that what we do still need, and this is important because I have you all in this room. This county is still without an actual shelter for the many children that we see. To send them back to places like Wisconsin where they come from, we don't get them back all the time to testify. We don't have the victims' advocates who yet can go out with us on every monthly operation. I've seen it myself in San Francisco, how critical it is to have them there as that first face they see when the option of whether to be arrested or to work with us to get themselves out of it presents itself. So we have rape trauma services. We're partnering with a lot of folks, but we really need law enforcement, the resources on the other side of this to work with us. And thank you all for making yourselves aware. I want to give you, there's a national hotline. It's 888-373-7888, and we will put it up at the end of the program. But just call your local law enforcement. Each and every police officer in this county is aware of and committed to ensuring that we extricate these slaves, these sexploited individuals, out of this pernicious crime.
Thank you so much. Denicia.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So, as stated before, my name is Denicia Cormier, and I'm a social work supervisor with Children and Family Services. So very similar to law enforcement, when we're working with kids, they're often taught not to talk to us. Like, everybody knows, CPS are the baby snatchers. They're gonna come in, they're gonna remove you from your parents. And so we had to really come up with a way to intervene in a very thoughtful, trauma-informed way. So when I first came on board 9 years ago, so a little bit of background, and I really wanna focus on the survivors that I want to highlight today. But I'm from East Oakland. I understand what trafficking is. I'm very familiar with that culture. I too was from foster care system and kinship care. And so when the lady up here spoke in the video about how traffickers look for that child who kind of, doesn't have the friendship network, doesn't have the support, is a step behind. For me, it was just constant transitions. So constant transitions between different high schools and really trying to find my place. I was introduced to a trafficker. I had the fortunate experience of having family that got involved to where that wasn't a life that I went through. But at the same time, when I came on board, went to school, came on board to be a social worker, I instantly recognized the signs in the youth that I was working with. And at that time, 9 years ago, there was very little help in San Mateo County for that. So what did I do? I went back to my roots, went back to Oakland, got training through Missy, a phenomenal organization that still exists today, and brought it back to San Mateo. Started a coalition here and started a prevention program for at-risk girls. Because what do we know? We know that youth who experience sexual trauma are 28 times more likely to be exploited at their point in their lives. The gentleman up here in the video talked about being exploited at the age of 5. 2 of the survivors that I still work with today started on my caseload 9 years ago, also had sex abuse traumas. within their own family of origin for the first one, and the second one, after she was removed from her family of origin, was sexually abused by her foster parent. And we have to really be accountable. There is something that everybody in this room can do. You know, if you're a law enforcement, as the chief just talked about, being that law enforcement officer who checks in with the child, who treats them as a victim, who checks in about their basic needs. How can I help you? If you're a neighbor, asking questions, being a support. If you are a mother of a daughter, spending extra time with her, being that person that can have those conversations that she might not feel comfortable having. If you're the father or a mother of a son, teaching him to respect his body and to respect others. And so there's always something that you can do. And it doesn't matter if you're not a social worker or not a mental health provider, as a community member. I've talked to church groups that have brought this back and made this the platform of their community service events. So there's just so much you can do. So in regards to the two survivors that I wanted to highlight, something that I really noticed, and I worked with dozens of girls, but these two are now survivor advocates in our county, and I'm so excited and proud for them. It's that as people who intervene, oftentimes we can feel that what we're doing is not making a difference. And I'm here to tell you that it is. You are seed planters, each and every person in this room. And the girls will say, you know, because they'll often get asked the question, what made you get out of the life? You know, how did you know that it was finally time? And for them, it was knowing that they had made enough contact with a probation officer, a police officer, a social worker, a therapist, that when they were finally ready to exit the life, that there was a number that they can call, that there was a person that they could reach out to. And so they have to be able to know that there's someone out there, a tangible person. So I think it's outstanding that we have the human trafficking hotline, but a tangible person, I can pick up my phone call, I can pick up the phone and call this person, and they'll find a way to get someone here to come help me, is really crucial. And the other thing is that you never give up. Oftentimes, you know, people talk about different breeds of dogs, like how pit bulls can be like this vicious dog that everybody is scared of. And sometimes the youth can present in that same way of just being really, you know, harsh, and you're just kind of like, what did I do to you today? Kind of thing. But at the same time, you have to look at that trauma history that Mr. Warren talked about earlier, that all of that plays into a role. They don't know yet if you're a safe person, so why should they trust you? And so they're going to be testing you, and you kind of have to stand up to that test each and every time to be able to understand the underlying issues behind that and to be empathetic to it. And sure enough, over time, that guard will get let down. The other thing that's really important and key is to be persistent in your intervention efforts. The average age of life expectancy for a young person involved in human trafficking is 7 years. And that means that if we are working with these 10, 11, and 12-year-olds, that by the time that they're even old enough to graduate from high school, they are very likely to be dead. And that's a reality. And we have to intervene. We can't continue to look the other way as a community. I also wanted to point out that collaboration is key. Do not expect to do this in silo. A lot of people in this room, a lot of people I'm up here on the panel with, I consider them friends because we have worked together to work with kids. I tried that. I tried that life of being the only person that was available to that child at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, all hours of the day and night. Because what you're doing is you're trying to replace this force in their life of their trafficker, who to them, you know, on some level was a god, was someone who was available 24/7, whether that was a good or a bad thing. And that was something that they helped to project onto that persona. And so as a provider for this child, you have to have a plan. So you have to go in with an intention. So if you're working with law enforcement and a child is rescued from a certain situation and you're placing them in a safe house or back with that grandmother or in foster care, there needs to be some kind of plan moving forward. You can't just expect, you know, the next person to pick it up and keep it going. And that's the part where we all where we really need to be very flexible in the work that we do with them. Being able to understand that for that first 24 hours, they might just need to be left alone. They might need to sleep. They might be really hungry, really helping to address those basic needs. And then after that, oftentimes we just kind of look at them like, you're a child. We want to treat you as a child. So let's get you in school. Let's get you some new clothes. Let's introduce you to some friends. And they have gone through a very traumatic experience that may have forever altered the state of who they are And that's fine because they can pick up those pieces with the help of everybody in this room and become a new person. But they need help to get there. And so being able to find those ways, Jenee is really great about being able to help wrap services around youth in the school setting. So what do we need? Do you need crisis intervention at school? Do you need to be homeschooled? What is the deal there? And so just being really flexible if you're someone who works with traffic survivors and the best ways to work with them. And I do want to highlight a special organization in my heart in the room, and that's Rape Trauma Services. And they are a phenomenal entity here within San Mateo County. I hope that Amanda can provide her information at the end of this panel because they are someone who, oftentimes when you're working with a victim, as I said before, they might not present as a victim, and that might be very hard for them. You can only imagine, right? Like you feel like if I have nothing else, I have ownership of my body. I am in my place of being right now. And when someone takes that away from you, what do you have? What do you have? And so Rape Trauma Services is really great about being there, being present with the child, and walking them through that process as best that they can. And so I just really want to say that if you ever find yourself in need of really talking with an organization here in San Mateo County that can understand this population, to reach out to RTS.
Thank you so much, Denicia. And what a wonderful transition to Jenee from their Office of Education, San Mateo County.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Am I on? It's an honor to be here today, and it's a privilege to be up here on this panel. Thank you. As mentioned earlier, I'm from San Diego. I relocated from San Diego almost 2 years ago. And part of why I came up here was because of the assets, the strengths that exist in the schools, in the partnerships. Part of what I did as a school counselor was come into work in education to support students. I had no idea by the time I left San Diego 15 years later, about 60% of my job would be to support students that are current victims or survivors of human trafficking. And along the journey that I had there, it was very much the learning that I had from my child welfare partners, my law enforcement partners, that really helped us understand what's happening in our schools. And sometimes what trafficking looks like through the child welfare lens or through law enforcement, some of that carries over to schools, but sometimes it looks very different in the school setting, and we learned that quickly. And what we learned was that the schools, some of these students, unfortunately, are known to law enforcement or probation or child welfare, but all of them are known to schools, or all of them should be known to schools. And so we really, off of what Denicia said, having that caring adult, so many of our teachers and educators are that really caring, connected adult in the lives of these young people, and we wanted to make sure that they understood what are the warning signs, what does it look like, and then if I identify a victim, how do I get my partners involved? What are the steps I take? How do I call my friends at child welfare? And then how do we pull in law enforcement? And so fortunately, here in San Mateo County, we worked with Rape Trauma Services, we worked with child welfare, we worked with Mike Brosnan, and we recently just produced an educator protocol for folks in schools of what does it look like, but more importantly, also what do you do when you suspect you have a student that might be a trafficking victim? What steps do you take? How do you ensure their safety in your campus? And how do you make sure that the exploiters know to stay away from your schools? Mm-hmm. So as we started the training, we just trained for the first time in April. What we know is true and what we suspected is that once we trained, people understood what it was that they were seeing. Because sometimes what it looks like on a campus can be girl fights that we assume is about kind of the traditional, we're fighting over a boyfriend. But in reality, it's enforcement connected to a boyfriend that's more the exploiter. And so some of the things that we're seeing on campuses we're missing as huge indicators as truly connected to either recruitment, enforcement, or actual trafficking. So here in San Mateo County, we just produced that. And we're rolling it out now to all the school districts and the school sites. And part of what you can do as a parent or educator is to help us. Sometimes educators or leaders are concerned that parents might not want this topic discussed. The way we approach it is to work with the educators. We know that if the adults on campus have the ability to pay attention to who's coming, picking up students, dropping students off, what are the pathways students are taking to and from schools, what are the conversations, what are the topics, what are some kind of anomaly type behaviors that we might see and maybe discount, but it really could be an indicator that the student's currently being victimized. And unfortunately, what we do know is that exploiters know our systems. They know exactly where our most vulnerable children go to school. Unfortunately, we do know that they target students with learning disabilities. We know that they target students from certain communities. And so all of the students that we work so hard in this community to support, especially our most vulnerable, unfortunately, our exploiters are targeting those students as well, but for negative consequences and outcomes. So things I've been asked to talk about what kind of you as a parent or grandparent do. For those of you that are an involved parent, that's great. That's the huge protective factor. And also making sure that the conversations, that there's a pathway for your student, your child to talk to you about uncomfortable scenarios. Oftentimes, as we heard from Maureen, the faith community can be a huge protective factor, and sometimes the faith community can be a risk factor. So students sometimes who have been victims are very fearful of being rejected, whether it's from their family, from their grandparents, from their community, from their faith community. So making sure as we're having these conversations that they know that we're non-judgmental, and that we're unconditionally going to be there to support them. And also watching how we talk about the language. So as we're talking about trafficking victims, when our children are listening to us, they're going to pay attention to whether this is a topic I can actually come and talk to my parents or grandparents about, or if this is a taboo subject. And so if it's happening to someone I know or someone I'm concerned about, that's not really a place I want to go because I'm afraid my parents or guardians aren't going to be there to support me. The other thing I want to say is that social media is a huge challenge in so many ways, right? But as parents and guardians, stay connected to your child's social media, monitor as much as possible, make sure that you're monitoring, that you're a friend of theirs and whatever social media that they're using. Also train your child on what does it mean to have a friend. And right now, unfortunately, I have 1,500 friends. Well, that's interesting because I've only met 3 of them, right? I mean, so it's really defining what a friend is and how we allow access to our information. And what we know about young people is that they often want to overshare, and they are easily manipulated into oversharing and checking in or allowing GPS elements on their social media so that exploiters or folks that have negative intention for our children can use those to actually victimize or target our children. Conversations such as, so what would you do if someone came up to you in the mall and wanted to take your picture? Right? Prompt conversations that just allow for a conversation so your child might feel flattered. And because everybody's taking pictures everywhere, they may not realize that that's something that's inappropriate and should not happen. But they won't know that until we start those conversations. So while we're working really hard in schools to make sure our educators are trained, that they know what to look for, making sure our educators know when to call in our partners, making sure our partners know when to call us in, what we know is that you on the front line are the best protective factor. So having these conversations and paying attention to the children that your children are connected to, because they need protective factors. They need you. Maybe it's you giving them a ride home after practice because you notice that they're continuing to not have a ride home. Or maybe it's you recognizing that their parent has to work a lot on the weekends, and so maybe you invite them over to your house. Maybe you lean in to support them because even if it's not trafficking, there's a lot of negative consequences that could happen to our young people, but what we know is that they need positive, caring adults, and so you definitely can be that. I'm trying to help you with Brian's assignment of figuring out the 10, 10, and 10. There are some good tangible takeaways of things that you can do.
Thank you so much, Jenee. Many of us who work with child abuse survivors recognize that the threats that are implied or even stated during the time of the abuse carry on throughout a person's lifetime. And you mentioned that the threats that the traffickers use often goes beyond when they're rescued. It makes it more difficult for them to stay in a rescued position because those threats are still there. Brian, could you comment on that, and perhaps also you, Chief Manheimer?
Well, as we heard earlier, that in the case here in San Mateo County, the trafficker was continuing to call the survivor right afterwards. So Restoration is just, it's a lifelong process, is what Denicia just said. I mean, it's not something that you come out of a trafficking situation, you're healed right away. There's services, and the service providers in this room and around the Bay Area are providing those services over a lifetime, from the immediate services necessary to ultimately maybe finishing their schooling, getting education, getting job training, so they can get back on their feet and have a relationship of a network of people around them who support them, because no one can do it by themselves.
Yeah, I think what's most apparent to us is that it's the vulnerable and those who don't have that supportive infrastructure around them that tend to get drawn into this in the first place. So the recognition alone that we can intervene at the moment, but what are they going back to? And if that's the same type of infrastructure that wasn't there in the first place, how are we mobilizing all of the safety and support networks? So through the county, especially through Board of Ed, we are having to work and are working seamlessly to assess what it is that we need to get there for a safety net. I was floored to learn that I had an officer who actually went back to Wisconsin 3 times to check in on one of the victims who he had worked so long and hard, put over 100 hours into making sure that she got to all the right resources, because they fall through the cracks. That's why they are where they are. And he had actually gone back there, checked in with the parents, recognized that that family structure wasn't working, and helped to get behavioral and human services in Wisconsin involved. So that is what you sometimes need to do. Do the extraordinary to leverage your resources.
Thank you so much. Denicia, if we notice somebody that's a loner, somebody lagging behind in our neighborhood, is there something that we can do in terms of action?
Yes. Well, I would say that, the best thing that anyone can do is be a mentor to a child. So Missy has this continuum of sexual exploitation that they talk about. And so they show that there are so many different points of intersection where we have the opportunity as adults to intervene, but that we don't. And so it's like anything from, how little girls, their clothing. So the clothing industry, like the anybody in here can see it. It's like the shorts are super short. They have writing across the rear end, all these different things. And so it's like we come from a community that really highlights a young lady's body very much. And so just being that person that can just pour in to the young people. And I really want to stress it's not just girls but boys as well, because it's girls and boys that can be victims, and it's girls and boys that can also be traffickers. Yeah. And so it's just really being a mentor to that person. And what people often, I know it's really easy to be just so about a trafficker, but these trafficked girls and boys often come from histories of trauma as well, and often come from families of trafficking as well. And so it's really ingrained. And so being able to be a mentor, to be a guide, to be a support for a young person goes a long way.
I'd like to have somebody, if they would, collect questions that have perhaps been written. Thank you, Pam. Jenee, are there things that the school site committees can do to help with this issue?
Yes. Well, in addition to getting trained and knowing what this is and knowing what to do when you suspect or are concerned about a student, the fortunate part for us in San Mateo County is many of our school districts are leaning in and are either developing or contracting for some mental health services. And so we're training the mental health folks to understand what this is, to be able to be supportive and wrap students. Rape trauma services, to echo Denicia's recognition of their work, is they're not only partnering with us on the training, they're going in and saying, hey, school staff, if you have a student you're concerned about and getting that student linked to help was traumatic for you, we're here to help you as well. Or, hey, student, as you work through law enforcement and your services and you're returning to school, we can go and support you with your transition back to school. So that's kind of at the very top for students that are currently victims or survivors. But in general, the more positive, pro-social, positive experiences we can have, not only athletics, but the clubs, the different activities that really get kids connected, and not only from our lens as adults, but listening to the students about what's interesting to them and making sure that they have the support to start whatever activity or whatever kind of event that is meaningful and relevant to them. So maybe it's a poetry night on a Friday evening outside the school day, and that's going to catch a cohort of students that maybe aren't getting caught in other areas. And so we do focus a lot on school climate, and we ask our educators to think about how is every student meaningfully connected, because we know that the second to a caring adult, being connected to a school campus is the strongest protective factor for young people for all negative outcomes.
Maureen, one thing I just wanted to reinforce, if any of you have any doubts or any thoughts about something that didn't seem right, and this can go for anything, it's not just for someone you believe is being sexually exploited, but for any very strange relationship that you see that there may be tension, force, fear, feel free to call any of us. Don't search for where in human services should I report this. Just the wonderful thing is that law enforcement, we are all inputs for that, for that network that we have put together in our county. You can call your local law enforcement, and they will be as trauma-informed now in dealing with this as any of your trained professionals up here. So be overly zealous in getting to us anything that you think may be, because very often we have that sense inside that something's not right. Take that opportunity, call.
And that responds to a question that was asked, that they noticed different things around a house, weren't sure, but if they call the law enforcement, they're able to sort that out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll do so with our partners. So it may not be the smartest to go right away into that house, because there may in fact be trouble in that house. So we've really learned to be smart about how we approach, how we talk about it. What Warren said earlier, even leading questions that can inflict more trauma in when we debrief someone. So don't be afraid, make that first call. We will put all the resources to work.
Brian, can you highlight some of the non-sexual forms of human trafficking?
There was a case in Saratoga just a year and a half ago with, there were 6 victims who were from Spain. There was a couple that was labor trafficking them to work in a nail salon and a restaurant. And I say that because a lot of people think Saratoga is this little bedroom affluent community where nothing like that happens. And so that case, the victims were brought out of the situation. The traffickers are still going through a case right now in Santa Clara County. But as I mentioned earlier, it happens in industries all around the Bay Area. There's some pretty well-known cases. And as we heard before, the more media picks up on them, the more our goal of awareness is going to be a deterrent to traffickers. Because the more the traffickers see that people know what to look for, people are reporting in, and then ultimately getting convicted, then the less likely they are to actually try to do their crimes in our communities.
And I also remember what your colleague Betty Ann told about last time. So each time you come to this, we learn something more. But she told a story of people noticing that there were bars on the windows of a local house in the cul-de-sac, and it turned out to be that the bars were on the inside because they were being held in terms of labor trafficking. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this panel, for bringing us the stories and your experiences in helping us all improve our community and keep our community safe. And I turn it right now. One more thing about the questions. There were a couple that we didn't get to. I'm very concerned about the time, but please feel free to talk with them afterwards. And so I turn it back to Maureen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Warren, for guiding our panel discussion. And let's give a big hand to the amazing panel and to all of today's speakers for the wealth of information that they provided. I hope all of you are going to be leaving here feeling like you have a much better understanding of human trafficking. And I also want to give a big hand to all of you for being here today, to really care enough to find out about this pressing issue in our community. My great hope is that through increased awareness, we will expose human trafficking in our communities. We'll rescue victims, and we'll bring perpetrators to justice. So together with your help, that is an achievable goal. So when you leave, please go talk to your family, talk to your friends, help others to understand what human trafficking is all about, and understand that it is here before our very eyes. So please say something, do something, and help us in this battle. Now, before closing, I want to note that the Event Center has very generously donated a large amount of tickets to the fair, so you can actually go see our wonderful art exhibit. If you haven't seen it yet, it's quite moving. I encourage you to do so. You can pick up tickets at the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition
One more thing before you.
Okay. Table on the patio. And the other thing is, if you do get tickets and go to the fair, don't leave your car here, because the garage closes at 4:15, and you will be stuck without your car all weekend. So thank you.
Or they'll call us.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Please join us for the reception on the patio. Warren told me there's something else.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Yes, Councilmember Freschet. You know, I just wanted to mention, we've recognized the whole committee, but your personal commitment and passion to this has been long-term. And I know this has been something you have focused on for a long time. You've put hundreds of hours into making this happen today. Even as late as last night, she was calling people to make sure they were going to be here. And every detail, large and small, and it is really, I think, a vision of really what you were challenged with bringing to Central County. You've been amazing. So this is a small token of our appreciation. It's fruits and nuts, and it gives you some energy because you have put it all on the table. We want to thank you. Thank you.
Go out and enjoy some refreshments, and thank you again for being here.